I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah. What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All right. This is Dr. Mouse. Welcome back to All Things Unexplained. I'm joined again by Smitty. This is our back-to-back, our second feature of the night as we dive into the JFK files. And for this episode, we're getting into 104-104131036, the Mad Scientist Assassin. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We're also on LinkedIn tonight and X. If you're listening to this on our audio platforms, go ahead and follow us. Hit the 5 stars. Be so kind, if you will, to give us a great review. That really helps the episode out a lot, helps the show out a lot. And check us out at allthingsunexplained.com. So tonight we're going back to the JFK files again, Smitty, for a very interesting character. This is a lengthy file. It's 91 pages, so obviously we won't be going over all that. But I think it's the most fascinating file that I've uncovered in the JFK files. And it talks about a character by the name of, and I'm going to put his name up on the screen here, Yuri. That's Yuriy Moskalov, Moskallev. And Smitty is going to tell us a little bit about Yuri.
Well, he was obviously a huge, apparently, according to the information, a scientist who was, what did he focus on? He focused on plutonium and radiation and those types of things, which is pretty interesting considering, as we talked about before, at the time we were in a very dead even race with the Russians to develop nuclear technology and weapons. And you jump in anytime. He was one of the most fascinating things about the files to me was the fact that they asked him, was this just about the science? Did you read that part?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy, Yuri Moskallev, what a character. And the CIA basically, I mean, according to the file, they wondered, they thought he might really be the JFK assassin. I mean, they literally were pondering that.
And, if anybody would have wanted JFK dead, it would have been the Russians. I mean, the USSR. And the amazing thing to me is just the whole of the moving parts of this whole assassination. November of 1963, and one of the craziest things to me about the whole thing is not necessarily the assassination itself, but Abraham Zapruder, who was able to capture it all on camera and just went out to film the president and captures. Imagine being known throughout history as the man who caught the most historical moment almost in U.S. history and the most argued moment in U.S. history on camera, when all you wanted to do was, film the presidential procession. And so that's why we have the Zapruder film. I've watched it probably 100 times, maybe more.
Pretty incredible. And Smitty, we're joined by people from all around the world to delve into this JFK file. And the CIA basically had 3 theories about this Yuri Moskaloff. And the first theory was that Yuri was this mystery man who was spotted at the Russian embassy in Mexico City. And I want to be sure I say this correctly. An unidentified man was seen entering and exiting the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in October 1963. And the CIA, it seemed like they really believed that this was quite possibly Yuri Moskaloff. And that was in October 1963. As a reminder, the assassination happened in November 1963. So just a month later was the assassination. And we're talking about the election happened in November of 1960. So, Smitty, what have you got anything else on the Mexico City incident?
Well, I think that if you were going to want to come into this country and not really have it known well, that would have been a great place to be able to just come across the border, because at this time, obviously, we don't have the patrols that we have now. I mean, back then that we have now, and being able to just blend in, cross the border into Texas, pretty much unbeknownst to most people. But that is so fascinating that he was there a month prior to, November the 22nd, 1963, the day that really shook the whole United States of America. I know that my parents know exactly where they were at that day that had happened. It was just burned into the minds of every American. And to me, with him going into the embassy there, what was he doing there? What was his business that he needed to seek out the embassy in Mexico during that time, which is suspicious to me in general, unless he just needed some sort of favor, whatever it might be, but very suspicious.
And one striking thing for me about this was, it's so hard to remain anonymous in today's society. It's essentially impossible to have yourself not photographed, not identified in all kinds of places, not on all kinds of video cameras, all over the place. But apparently, in the 60s, this was in 63, it was a whole different ball game, right? Like seems like you could stay pretty well hidden if you were skilled at that sort of thing. And here on page 36 of the file, and I've put this up on the screen, they actually have a couple of photographs of the mystery man from the Russian embassy. And here they are. It says subject unidentified man seen going into Cuban. Smitty, watch your hot mic there. It says subject unidentified man seen going into Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City in October 1963. Photos taken by the Mexico City station. And we've got kind of a heavy set's not the right word. A big dude dressed all in black. And yeah, here's some photographs of him. And here's some more. I'm not sure where these are because these look like he's changed outfit. This might be when he's leaving. He's kind of changed outfits. And then on the next page, they've got several more photos of this mystery man. And here on the next page, it says unidentified man. And this is their theory 1, that the Russian embassy, this mystery man in Mexico City. shortly after the assassination. A photograph of this unidentified man was published in the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President Kennedy. Copies have also been widely distributed in news media by journalists critical of the Warren Commission investigation. The subject visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City during October of 1963, and the assassination was in November of 1963. He was described as 35 years old, athletic build, 6 feet tall, blonde, receding hairline with balding top, and wore khakis and a sports shirt. You know, it's crazy, Smitty. I mean, they've got all these photographs here of him, but they literally, I mean, they honestly had no real clue about who it was.
Yeah, and here's another thing. Why are the Mexican authorities taking pictures of this man? You know, how are they connected to the U.S. to be watching these two embassies? Something's going on there. I mean, I don't think they just took those because they thought. I don't think Mexico was too overly worried too much probably about the Cold War. They might have been about nuclear devastation maybe, but still, I just think that's kind of strange in itself. But this gentleman visiting these two embassies really cranks up the suspicion about who was he, why is he there, and having that easy access to just come over into Texas and then make his way to Dallas. You know, is he the JFK assassin?
Right.
That's the question.
I mean, it would be a disturbing revelation if the Russians were involved in the JFK assassination. And here we see the pictures of this mystery man. And is this Yuri Moskalov from Russia? That's what the CIA wanted to know. Smitty, at one point in this document, and the document is big, it's 91 pages long, they do get some of their forensic specialists to analyze these photographs and then known photographs of Yuri. And to a very high degree of certainty, they believed that it was Yuri Moskalov. So, I mean, Smitty, here's my question for you. If this is indeed Yuri Moskalov, the mystery man from the Mexico City Russian embassy, what probability range does that place this mystery man, this Yuri, being the actual assassin?
Oh, that's a hard percentage to come up with, but I will say this, what you're talking about, the photographs, I thought that was interesting. They did look at those, and some of the ones they took of Yuri later were when he was older, and they did say, well, this age compensates for this being not, and it's true. I mean, I don't look like I did when I'm 25. I'm 50, and so they were pretty certain that they believe this to be Yuri. Now, what the chances of him actually assassinating Kennedy are, I really can't say, but I will say that it is totally strange for him to visit both of those embassies, especially when JFK had already had the Bay of Pigs invasion with Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis with Cuba and Russia, and then this man comes and he shows up to both embassies. No one that I'm aware of probably wanted JFK dead worse than the Cubans and the Russians during this period of time, other than if you believe what the Warren Commission said, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right. And we've got a second theory. So the CIA actually reviews 3 theories about Yuri Moskalov in this document, 104-10413-10306. And I want to give a little hint to everybody when they're reviewing these documents. Make sure you go ahead and check out the document before the one you're looking at and after, because sometimes they seem to be lumped together with the same subject. You might find a little bit more on what you're looking at. But their second theory, Smitty, was that Yori was also a character that went by the name of Saul, which was supposedly the real assassin of JFK from the book Appointment in Dallas by one Hugh C. MacDonald. What do you know about Appointment in Dallas, Smitty?
Well, one of the most interesting things to me was that they said Saul fired bullets that would have been similar to and might have been mistaken for the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald had, which indicates that Lee Harvey Oswald might have been part of the conspiracy to kill JFK. And this book is pretty fascinating. I'm going to go back and read it again, but I think that it's just opens a lot of possibilities that most people don't look at anymore. And these files have opened some. And the mad scientist thing, and if you read the documents, he has gone on so many different conferences all across the world. Once again, when we talk about the musician a moment ago, this gives him access as a scientist not only to different areas of the world, but to also all sorts of different research, different individuals that are, higher level functioning in different parts of government and just all these different things. So he was able to network with people that the average people would not be able to network with. And I found that really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And something I found interesting about Appointment in Dallas by Hugh C. MacDonald is you could probably just write this off as another JFK book because, there are a lot of JFK books. And what sets this one apart is that the author, Hugh C. MacDonald, was a former LAPD detective and inventor of the Identikit. That's Identa as in identity kit, which was used by, guess who? The CIA. So it's like this bizarro world here to me that this entire JFK file is spent speculating on things like the true identity of Yuri Moskaloff, the true identity of Saul from Appointment in Dallas. And here they are, we see these photographs on the screen of this mystery figure from Mexico City. And the author of this book, it sure is a big coincidence that part of their specialty is in identifying people with this invention of his called the Identikit, which was the precursor to our modern facial recognition software. Isn't that strange?
Yeah, that's kind of mind-blowing. Not to mention, too, this access to the CIA. What other person has really, and there may be some out there, I'm not saying there's not, but what author has direct access to the Central Intelligence Agency and has written a book about the JFK assassination? I don't know that there's not anyone out there, but I'm going to say the number would be minuscule. And for this person not only to do that with the identity kit, but also the CIA connection, that's pretty mind-blowing. Because as well as I do, that if people are told to be quiet, not everybody's always quiet. Even though, that could cause a huge problem. But things have been leaked out from our government where they weren't supposed to be leaked out. Look at Snowden, who worked for the NSA. He went literally in front of a camera and told about what the NSA was doing. So who's to say that this gentleman couldn't have heard things that were classified from the CIA and then turn around and wrote a book about it?
Oh, yeah. So in Appointment in Dallas, this Saul character, which the author lets it be known that's not the person's real name. Now, there's some bigger questions here, like how did the author get in contact with Saul? How did they find Saul? Why was Saul talking to them? But Saul basically admitted or confessed or claimed, I guess it depends how you look at it, to be the actual assassin of JFK. And here we are talking about all this identity stuff, and Saul, in Appointment in Dallas, claims that he escaped detection after the assassination by pretending to have a limp, which I thought was a really weird thing. He pretended to have a limp and was out of the country, I think he said, within a day.
Yeah, I mean, that's fast, and speaking of somebody, I have a torn meniscus. I know what a limp's like right now. To be so concerned about your identity and then to just disappear, something strange about that. Very strange. I mean,
yeah, that's right. And finally, their third theory here in this file about Yuri Moskov was, okay, Yuri, is he really a mad KGB scientist assassin? Well, apparently in real life, like you said, Smitty, Yuri was this biology physicist or biophysicist who specialized in all things radiation. Pretty interesting specialty for an assassin, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that someone that specialized in something like that in a communist country such as the USSR would have to have really, really top clearance for a lot of things, because the Russians were very, very hush-hush about every single solitary thing they did. And that goes both ways, telling us and other people, or actually telling their own people about what was going on. There's a story about an American engineer who went to Russia, and he's sitting and eating lunch with other Russian engineers, and they have guards watching them. The guards get distracted, and they lean over the table and says, "Listen, did you really put a man on the moon?" They're talking to America. They didn't even really 100% know whether or not the U.S. did, which we've discussed. We don't know either, but they just didn't tell a lot of information. If you can control information, whatever it might be, you can control the masses. And that's what Russia and the USSR was so good at. No freedom of press. And so, yeah, this is pretty mind-blowing.
So this Yuri Moskov, he was a Soviet biophysicist involved in space radiation, which we'll talk about in a minute, and plutonium research. He was suspected by the CIA to be a KGB asset and possible assassin of JFK. Here's a photograph of Yuri from a little bit later. This appears to be from 1974. It's a photograph from the Institute of Biophysics in Moscow. Now, Smitty, we saw the photographs earlier of the Mystery Man in 1963. This is 11 years later. What do you think? Is Yuri Moskov that we see here the Mystery Man?
I mean, it favors him to me. It really does. Of course, like I said, the documents even talk about, we have to take into account the aging factor and how people, I think it spoke about his chin. Do you remember that part? And how
right.
the fat on his chin would be different and how he might have lines around his mouth. But to me, this man does favor the man that was photographed in Mexico. And it's kind of mind-blowing. What in the world would a Russian scientist be doing in Mexico in 1963? Because I don't know this for a fact, but I have never heard a whole lot of radiation and those types of things or nuclear testing or any of that going on in Mexico. But yet he visits both the Cuban and the USSR embassies.
Yeah, not only that, but like you said, Smitty, Yuri got around a lot in his role as a biophysicist, and he got around to a lot of academic conferences. And guess who was watching? The CIA was watching. And so one of the most fascinating parts of this file to me was interviews between the CIA and some of the U.S. scientists who happened to be at some of these conferences with Yuri Moskaloff. And so I think that, we should look at some of this. Those interviews start on page 76. So
who in the world could you trust in the 1960s? We have the CIA making a man marry a woman to keep an eye on her as a communist. Who could you trust? Could you trust these scientists? It's mind-boggling. Like you said, what you see is not necessarily what you get during this period of time at all.
No, you're right about that. And let's look at some of these questions that U.S. scientists were asked by the CIA. This is a conference. It appears to be from October of 63. Very interesting time, right? From the IAEA Symposium on Neutron Irradiations in, I believe Long Island, New York. And Smitty, this is just constantly intriguing me because this is also, a lot of people want to look for the UFOs in JFK files. To me, these interviews with these scientists is the closest we got to touching on UFOs. So here we go. Some of these questions, let's just have a look at some of them. Did symposium contributions include significant advancements in research on controlled thermonuclear reactions that may be useful in determining the feasibility of initiating uncontrolled thermonuclear reactions solely without the use of fissionable materials, which would produce large amounts of energy on the order of 1 kiloton or greater? That's a pretty spectacular question that wasn't on my bingo card for the JFK files.
No, and another thing, that just proves that if Yuri was some sort of covert agent or KGB, this gentleman is super intelligent. I don't think he could fake this level of science knowledge, unless he really, really has done some studying or something. And to go to these conferences, he is what he says he is, at least in my opinion, on the end of the science part. And whether he's the assassin, I'm not really sure. But obviously the gentleman is super intelligent to be able to step in these areas with these people and to have intelligent conversations.
Yeah, so I need to point out another very important date. This interview with these scientists from this conference was in October 1963, or the conference was in October 1963. That's important because the first successful manned moon landing by the United States, supposedly July 20th, 1969. So 6 years later, whereas the Apollo missions. The next question, fascinating, was anything presented on effects of space radiation on the human body? This is 6 years before Apollo.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. That is pretty mind-blowing. How would they adequately be able to answer that question? What year did Gagarin go up into space? I can't remember right off the top of my head.
Well, and they were doing some tests with animals.
Yeah.
And Yuri talks about this.
Animals versus human radiation could be vastly different. I would think that's
Yuri actually
question.
mocks the U.S. animal experiments from the point of view that we were experimenting with small animals like mice. Yuri found that laughable. How could that apply towards the human body in space? What knowledge would you gain? Apparently, the Russians were well known that they were using large animals in radiation tests. So it's a good point. How would they know about space radiation? But they were definitely doing radiation tests on the ground. The next question for the scientists: were there results in the use of drugs in radiation protection? So there's just a whole lot of emphasis here and importance placed on the space radiation and the effects on the human body here.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing if you think about it. I like where he says, I do not recall anyone's discussing drugs, Soviet or other.
Right.
And that although research in drugs is continuing, radiologists are not very optimistic about their value. So he doesn't think a whole lot of the drug usage on that. But yeah, what does that play into? What was going on behind the scenes that the public wasn't exposed to about the space race? Did we only go to the moon in 69, or was it prior to 69 and we didn't know it, or did we ever go to begin with?
Well, we're talking a lot about it in 63, and again, I should save this, so don't answer it yet. Why is this even in the JFK files? Why is someone that they think in 3 different ways might be the assassin of JFK talking and experimenting with space radiation? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It doesn't make any sense, really, unless this is way out there, but unless
that's what we're here for.
That some reason that his assassination was driven by some part of the space race. It doesn't make any sense. It's like I told you a while ago. It would be like talking about one person and you never even come in contact with that person, so they really don't have any effect on you. And why is this important? These are documents that were given to the Warren Commission, correct?
Yes.
So what the world has this got to do with November the 22nd, 1963?
Yeah. And I was going to say it might be important if in 1947 something of non-human intelligence crashed in Roswell, New Mexico.
That's true. That's possible.
That would explain a lot. The next question for the scientist, Smitty, I also found this fascinating. Was anything presented on the characteristics of a bioelement, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, used for space radiation detection, including the number required for an extended space probe and the method of transmitting information?
That just blows my mind right there. An extended space probe? We haven't even put a man on the moon, and it's when this document's out, right? Correct? And they're talking about an extended space probe. But I think that might, too, go back to the fact that we were so enamored with beating the Soviet Union and us into the space race that maybe they're planning way further in the future than they actually should have been at this point in time.
Right. And that was page 1 of the interview with these scientists. And then here's page 2. And some of these questions are not very legible. They talk about biological indicators at low ranges of radiation doses. They talk about this is fascinating. Were results presented on cosmic and Van Allen belt radiation effects on organisms in such areas as lethal, metabolic, developmental, and genetic? And they said nothing was presented on that, but just the fact they were asking about that. You know, some people use Van Allen belts as proof that we did not ever go to the moon, because some people say, interestingly enough, that the Russians believed or discovered that humans could not survive a trip through the Van Allen radiation belts.
That's just weird.
Is this evidence of that?
It's possible. I mean, you know, they're obviously, and I'd like to see what we had on this, but they're obviously, you know, on a different level than what we all assumed everybody was during this period of time. You know, until I've read this, you know, I thought, well, Sputnik, that was neat and sending things up. But the questions they're asking are pretty mind-blowing for what little interaction we had with space during this period of time. And I know they could have maybe tried some of those experiments here and made those conditions similar. But how did they know what the conditions are? Right. That's the question.
And I want everybody to pay attention to this. We're looking at file 104-10413-10306. All Things Unexplained was the first to discuss this file about Yuri Moskaloff. The CIA, someone felt the need to put brackets and underline the answer to this question. They put brackets around the question and underlined it, and then another question on page 2 is underlined. So it's worth paying attention to here. And I don't know, what is that symbol out beside it, Smitty? Do you see the symbol in brackets?
I'm not real sure. Of course, I'm about half blind now, up close. That's why I have to hold the computer. But yeah. I am not really sure
if anybody
what that means, because it's repeated down here.
Correct. If anybody in the audience knows what that symbol is, I mean, I hate to say it, it kind of looks like a sperm.
Yeah, it kind of does, actually.
I know that's not what it is representing, but in brackets here, they say the question from the CIA to the scientist is, did the Soviets say anything bearing on physical measurements of radiation in space in terms of relative biological effectiveness factor and implications for future manned space flights?
Now, I did look it up. Gagarin was shot into space in 1961, but he was only up there for 108 minutes aboard Vostok 1. And so he was up in there in 1961. But what's weird, and I need to look that up, he died in 1968. I would like to see what his cause of death was.
Is it the same trip Katy Perry just went on?
Maybe. I don't know. Did she go with Bezos, or did she go with Musk? I mean, who funded that trip?
That was Bezos, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it was.
3 other ladies were in the capsule with her.
Yeah. Shatner's been up there. I mean, you know, I feel like they keep up this technology. It's just going to be like flying from transcontinental one side of the U.S. to the other side.
So I think we can put to bed one argument. I've heard people say, well, the space race had nothing to do with the JFK assassination. We can put that argument to bed now, because you know what? It had something to do with it, because here it is in the JFK files.
And not only is it in the JFK files, it's in there in detail.
Yes.
I mean, it's in there, all these questions. it is. I just don't. It's so confusing to read something like this to a certain extent because you just have no clue where they're coming from and trying to connect this to, you know, Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, only they know.
Yeah.
Only they know. And the underlying part here, do you think Mosklov's objections were motivated from anything more than a genuine scientific position? Read between the lines, Smitty. What do you think that means?
Let me read it again.
Do you think Mosklov's objections were motivated from anything more than a genuine scientific position?
Seems like to me they believed he was maybe some agent for the USSR other than just a regular everyday scientist. I mean, why would you ask that otherwise?
Now, I'm going to tell you what I consider one of the most important things about this document that All Things Unexplained discovered. These were just released documents. We've got this interview with these U.S. scientists that were at a radiation conference with Moskov. We just went over page 1. Page 2, it gets really intriguing. They're talking about the Van Allen belts. They're talking about manned future space flights. And then it goes to page 5. Page 3, page 4, gone. Now you tell me that UFOs aren't on page 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's a very strange occurrence for sure. And I say another thing about him going up. We talked about, we didn't know, but he went up in 61, but only for 108 minutes. It said the things they're talking about is almost like a child learning to take his first step, and then the next day they want him to run the 100-meter dash. That's how fast this seems to be progressing. This series of questions, you're going from 108 minutes in space to humongous space exploration. And I guess maybe it's wishful thinking, but to me it seems weird. It seems like you're almost skipping over a huge step of putting a man up in there for more than an hour and 48 minutes.
Right. And here we are in part of the most mind-blowing section of this entire document. And they just omit 2 pages from the interview. They go on later here where they're reporting from the Soviets on types of radiation detection equipment used in the Vostok flights. Smitty, do you know anything about the Vostok flights?
That was him when he went up.
Okay.
Gagarin went up in Vostok 1, and of course I'm sure they sent people up in more flights after that, and probably we had Apollo 11, numerically numbered. So,
and here they ask, how is this neutron change manifested in large animals? I think it's safe to say there were some pretty all-around disturbing experiments with animals happening around this time.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even during World War II, the Russians were doing some pretty wild things, and I'm sure the U.S. might have been, but it's more known about the Russians of the things that they were doing to try to create something like super soldiers and everything. And so, yeah, there were some strange things going on.
Yeah, here on page 7, was there anything on mapping and profiles for space radiation? Whether Moskov was concerned with this or not, the CIA certainly was.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. As we know, now we can almost use space to send weapons and other different things, because Reagan had the Strategic Missile Defense Initiative, or as we called it in the 80s, Star Wars, where he was wanting to shoot down nuclear weapons before they actually reached the United States from space.
Oh, yeah. And here's the question. Was there anything from the Soviets on methods of radiation shielding? Again, I hear people scoff at this notion of space radiation in the Van Allen belts, but this was clearly a huge concern at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean they've asked how many questions.
Smitty, I lost you there.
Yeah, I'm just saying it was a huge concern during this period of time, because how many questions they've asked, multiple questions about space radiation.
Yep. So one thing that was also happening around this time, Smitty, was something called Project Fishbowl. Project Fishbowl. And this was essentially the testing of nuclear explosions in space. Operations Fishbowl, series of high-altitude nuclear tests conducted in 1962 under Project Dominic, suspected by some of triggering UFO retrievals. And there's a long-standing theory that these tests brought down UFOs or disrupted the UFO technology similar to EMPs. I mean, I can't help but wonder again, we got these 2 pages missing. Like, was certainly Project Fishbowl, which really happened, that had to be on somebody's mind, right?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes back to even though it's prior to this, the belief that it was Eisenhower met with the aliens when he was in, where was that at? He was in California. He was on vacation. He met with them in order to discuss basically nuclear weapons, and would we give up our right to nuclear weapons to keep the world and the universe safer than it had been. That's what a lot of people really believe, that happened. And they offered us in exchange, if we would do that, to give us a great deal of their technology. However, of course, he didn't want to do that because of the Russians. And he thought, well, if we give that up, then that's going to leave them with the technology that can annihilate us. Of course, right. I don't know if that's happened, but that's how the story goes. We'll put it that way.
Right. And Smitty, I'm going to recap here real quick. We're talking about file 104-10413-10306. You can search that up in the JFK file release. And we call it the mad scientist assassin. The CIA basically had 3 theories about one, Yuri Moskalov. Theory 1 is that Yuri was a mystery man that was spotted in the Russian embassy in Mexico City around the time of the assassination. Theory 2 was that Yuri was another mystery man that went by the name Saul in the Book Appointment in Dallas, whose author just so happened to be the inventor of something called the Identikit, the precursor to our modern facial recognition software, which was used by none other than the CIA. And theory 3, that Yuri was a mad space radiation scientist working for the KGB and using these academic conferences to get all over the world, right? Kind of unseen and undetected. So I got 2 big questions here for you, Smitty. I'm going to put you on the spot, okay?
Okay.
Number 1, what is file 104-10413-10306, which is 91 pages long? Why is it in the JFK files?
Well, obviously, there was a pretty strong suggestion that Yuri had something to do with the assassination of the president. I mean, like I said, there's the Cuban embassy, there's the Russian embassy, Mexico. A month prior to, it could possibly just be that they're trying to check all the boxes too. but it is weird. I mean, this gentleman from the USSR, we believe to be there a month prior with access to Texas, visiting both embassies that absolutely 100% despise John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And so I guess it could be to the point that they did not want to, the Warren Commission did not want to leave any stone unturned. Because if they would have proved the Russians did it, I would like to think that there had been some sort of retaliation. But I may be wrong about that, because when LBJ did come into office, he was not a fan of the Kennedys. Not at all. As a matter of fact, him and Robert couldn't even hardly been in the same room together. And so when he took over the executive branch with the death of JFK, who's to know what he squelched or denied, because he was happy to be in the presidency more than he'd been able to, more happy than he'd been in any other office, I'm sure, because he hated being vice president. He said being vice president was like being naked in a snowstorm, butt naked in a snowstorm, and no one would give you a match. That's exactly what he said. He said, and I don't use foul language, and I'm not going to, but you can fill in the blank. He said the difference between the presidency was chicken salad and the vice presidency was chicken, fill in the blank. Crap. We'll say crap. That's not what LBJ said. So could he have intentionally covered up something that he knew in order for them not to have to retaliate? Because now he's sitting in the seat he wanted to be sitting in the Oval Office.
And that's why I'm so happy. You know, we talked about this on Twitter quite a while back, shortly after the JFK files were released. And I'm so happy to have Smitty here back out of retirement tonight, because he is our history man. And this is right in his wheelhouse. And I'm going to put you on the spot again, Smitty, because this is one of the things that's really puzzling and bothering me. Why would a biophysicist who specializes in space radiation want to have Kennedy dead?
That is a great question, and I really don't 100%, I really can't answer that, but I can theorize that if that's the case, I would think that it would come from up above, because the Russians, the USSR, well known in applying pressure wherever pressure could be applied. They didn't care a lot of times about people's lives, wrecking their lives. They put people in Siberia, prison camps, kill people. I mean, all those types of things. And to tell a man, look, we're going to take everything you have, kill your family, do whatever. Now, this is a big assumption, but I could see where that might be a very big motivating factor if he did kill Kennedy, why he killed Kennedy. Because he did have great access, as we said before. Now, Oswald, of course, rubbed elbows. He lived in Russia for a long time. Who knows? Maybe he came in contact with Yuri during that period of time. He wasn't very happy. He didn't think that communism was being ran the correct way, how he viewed it in the USSR. So he came back to the US and he started to try to really push for Cuban communism, which had come kind of from Russia. But anyhow, I don't know. It would be interesting to know.
Christian Thompson on LinkedIn tonight says, very interesting, Christian. We appreciate you being here. We've got audience members from all around the world join us for this back-to-back delve into the JFK files with Smitty, and I'm Dr. Mounts tonight, and this is All Things Unexplained. Smitty, before we went live on this mad scientist Yuri Moskov tonight, we had another episode on this musician in Austria, this famous radio television personality who was a CIA asset for his whole life, it appeared. I couldn't help but wonder, Smitty, when you were talking about the pressure the Russians apply to people to get them to do what they want them to do. Did we ruin Walter Deutsch's life?
It sounds like it to me. I mean, obviously, he was so in fear of being exposed that he was almost begging and pleading to not mess up what life he had in Austria. And I mean, we applied pressure too. The fact is, though, I think that we're a lot more sneaky about it, and because the Russians didn't have to hide a lot of things that they hid, because they were a communist country who had basically a dictator, and Stalin, and of course Khrushchev, and all of those started out with Vladimir Lenin. And so we are a representative government. So a lot of things that happens in our government might not be good public knowledge if those people want to get back in office and continue to stay in office.
Right.
Because we've had some people in Congress for a long time since we don't have
you got that
in the
right.
Senate. Since we don't have any, term limitations on our House of Representatives or Senate.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder some of that is about keeping these secrets, compartmentalize these secrets when people find them out, and they just, we have to have it compartmentalized and safe, and the devil we know, is maybe better than the devil we don't know. But Smitty, I want to review the evidence before I ask you our final two biggest questions of the night. This is the evidence the CIA had on Yuri Moskalov. Number one, the CIA believed that he probably was the mystery man seen at the Russian embassy in Mexico City around the time of the assassination. Number two, the CIA believed he could be the mystery man Saul in the book Appointment Dallas by MacDonald, who had ties with the CIA through this identikit that he invented. And number three, the CIA believed that Yuri Moskalov, well, they didn't just believe, they knew that Yuri Moskalov, through his scientific connections, was able to travel the globe at this highly contentious time of the Cold War, right, in the 60s, and gain access to people and places that he may not otherwise, an ordinary citizen may not have been able to gain access to. So based on all this evidence, Smitty, sorry to do this to you. How likely is it that Yuri Moskalov, Russian scientist, is the primary shooter or one of the shooters of John F. Kennedy?
I don't know. I'll be honest. Before reading these files, I was 100% convinced. And people may think I'm crazy, but I was 100% convinced Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But after this, it's kind of thrown a wrench in some of the things that I've thought all these years. And I've studied this in depth. But these files have kind of opened my eyes to lots of other possibilities. And for him to have the actual rifle in his hand, I don't know. I would say that would be an odd choice to pick this man. But at the same time, how many people that were in the USSR were forced into the Russian army and were highly trained in weaponry? And that's a strong possibility. I mean, you look at a lot of countries, army service is mandatory. A matter of fact, Oswald was in the military himself. He was known as a good shooter, And so for those things to happen, to come at a 100% conclusive stance on this would be almost impossible, I think, at this point in time.
Do you still think Oswald pulled one of the triggers?
I think it's a very, very good chance that he was standing alone almost on this. For the simple fact, if you go back and look, he had already tried to assassinate General Edwin Walker. He shot, and of course the window pane had the, and it hit the wood and deflected the bullet right over Walker's head. This was a known fact. Oswald was kind of a loose cannon a little bit. That's what makes me so not sure that anybody else would want to be in business with Lee Harvey Oswald, especially in these trying to assassinate a world figure.
Sounded like you had a calamity back there.
Yeah, somebody dropped something. Sorry. But, I'm not sure. I'm going to go back and do a lot more studying. I'm going to go back and read a few books. Keep searching through these files, see what else I find, and hopefully come up with a new conclusion or arrive at the same one after searching through these things.
Well, I want to thank Smitty for joining me tonight for something we've been looking forward to doing, and that is diving into the JFK files at All Things Unexplained. I feel like we've made some really monumental discoveries here in these files. And what I want to encourage everybody to do is don't think this is it. There's a lot more discoveries to be made because, as Smitty said, it's too much. It's too much information for any person to process. AI can't read through these files for you. Go ahead, dive in there. It might just change your perception of reality. I want to thank everybody from all around the world that's joined us tonight. We really appreciate you live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. If you haven't checked out our X, be sure to do so at AT Unexplained. Check us out at allthingsunexplained.com. And this has been All Things Unexplained and our look into the JFK files, and specifically tonight, Yuri Moskaloff for this episode. Smitty, it's been great. You want to take us out?
It was unbelievable. Enjoyed it. Thank you for viewing. And remember, be happy, be strange, listen to All Things Unexplained. And lastly, ask questions.
That's
Lots of answers out there. Thank you for tuning in tonight.
Good night, everybody. Yep, there goes the calamity.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah. What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
All Things Unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.